Good evening. My name is Mallory Papik, and I'll be discussing the initiative and referendum process in Arizona State, including the upsides and downsides of these legislative processes. To define initiative and referendum, we'll start with initiative. An initiative gives registered Arizona voters the power to propose new laws, amend existing laws, and constitutional amendments by collecting signatures from registered voters. With enough signatures, the measure will be placed on the ballot for a vote. The initiatives empower voters to exercise direct democracy and change measures, items, and parts of laws that don't serve them well. A referendum gives registered voters the power to veto an existing law or parts of a law by gathering signatures to place the issue on the ballot for the next general election, and it halts the measure until it can be put to a vote. This includes any law or part of a law that was passed by the state legislature, except laws immediately necessary for the preservation of public peace, health, and safety, or for the support and maintenance of the departments of the state government. This is how initiatives are created. So the first step is to form a political action committee through the Arizona Secretary of State's online system, which is called Beacon, or you can designate an existing political action committee to act as the petitioner sponsor. Requiring initiative petitioners to be sponsored by a political action committee ensures proper enforcement of financial transparency, accountability, and legal compliance through the direct democracy process. The next step is to file an application through the Secretary of State to petition with the Arizona Secretary of State. The application must include the name and address of the proponents or the leaders of the initiative and a summary of the measure. The proponents must file a statement of organization registering the political committee for campaign finance purposes. Once submitted, a serial number is granted and used to identify the initiative. The next step is to gather signatures from registered Arizona voters. For a constitutional amendment to be put on the ballot, you need 15% of all votes cast for the governor in the previous election, or for initiatives, you need 10% of the voters. Once the sheets are turned in, the signatures are then verified by the Secretary of State using a random sampling method and by the county recorder. If there are enough signatures, the measure or amendment will be put on the ballot for a yes or no vote. Now for referendums. The first step to create a referendum is the same as initiatives. You form a political action committee through the Secretary of State's online system, or you designate a political action committee to act as the petitioner sponsor. The next step is to file an application so that you can get your serial number, and you do the same steps. You name, address, a summary of the measure. The next step is to gather signatures from all registered Arizona voters. For a referendum to be placed on the ballot, you only need 5% of all votes cast for governor in the previous general election. Once the sheets are turned in, voter signatures are verified in the same way using a random sampling method and by the county recorder. And if there's enough signatures, the measure will be put on the ballot for a yes or no vote. To compare and contrast the initiative and referendum process, we will start with what is similar. What is similar is that both initiatives and referendums get their authority from Article 4, Part 1 of the Arizona Constitution. Also, the filing and oversight, both the initiative and referendum process, are overseen by the Arizona Secretary of State's office. Also, is to pass a measure, both initiatives and referendums require a simple majority vote to be passed on the ballot, and for anything that has to do with taxes, a 60% vote is needed. And lastly, for similarities, voter protection. Once a measure is passed by voters, initiatives and referendums are protected by the Arizona Voter Protection Act. This prevents the legislator from amending or repealing them without a 3/4 supermajority vote. So now for the differences between initiatives and referendums. Initiatives have the purpose of proposing new laws or amending the state constitution, while referendums, their purpose is to veto or approve laws recently enacted by the legislature. The origin of initiatives drafted by citizens, interest groups, or coalitions, and for referendums, they're first passed as a bill, and then the citizens address that they'd like to change it. The duration of signature gathering for initiatives, you have 24 months, but it must be 4 months prior to the election. You have 24 months to gather signatures, whereas with the referendum process, you have a strict 90-day window after the legislative session ends. Also, the threshold for signatures for initiatives are 10% for measures or laws and 15% for constitutional amendments, while it's only 5% for referendums to place a legislative act on the ballot. And lastly, the difference between the two is the immediate effect. So for initiatives, the law remains unchanged until voters pass the initiative at the ballot box. Comparison to referendums, it's an immediate halt of the law, which is something that is very amazing. Now we move on to the pros and cons of the initiative and referendum process. So the pros of this is the referendum acts as a legislative veto for voters, allowing them to stop unpopular or extreme laws passed by the Arizona state government before they take effect. Also provides a pathway around legislative gridlock by giving voters the power to pass policies that the legislator refuses to act on, such as minimum wage and legalized marijuana. Lastly, for the pros, the Voter Protection Act is an Arizona constitutional amendment that was passed in 1998. This ensured the will of the voter remains intact and prevents the legislator from overturning approved measures. Cons for these processes include vulnerability from big, wealthy states, or vulnerability from out-of-state wealth, because people who gather signatures, if they have a lot of capital behind them, have a bigger ability to have a higher volume of signatures in comparison to grassroots citizens without capital behind them. Also, the state legislator faces difficulty when attempting to amend needed errors and unintended loopholes within the passed measures because they need a 3/4 supermajority vote, which is difficult to get. Also, the oversimplification of choice when voting yes or no on these complex laws on the ballot. There might be parts that voters do like and don't like, and they're forced to compromise on their decision. And lastly, for the cons, ballot confusion is an issue in Arizona because the ballot is jam-packed with the numerous propositions that can overwhelm voters. Even though it's very democratic to have the ability to put all of these on the ballot, it can be really confusing for the average American. So, how do initiatives and referendums support the idea of direct democracy, as stated in the Arizona Constitution? Well, in Article 2, Section 2 of the Arizona Constitution, it's stated that all political power is inherent to the people. This establishes the Constitution's foundational philosophy of direct democracy. Registered voters have the power to initiate legislation through direct democracy, giving them power to enact changes that they care deeply about and that directly affects them. The direct democracy process in Arizona provides a powerful check on the state legislature. Arizona's constitution establishes 3 pathways for direct democracy: the right of initiative, the right of referendum, and the right of recall. Lastly, in Article 4, Part 1 of the Arizona Constitution, it's stated that the people reserve the power to enact or veto laws and amendments at the polls. And that will conclude the presentation on initiatives and referendums. Thank you.